Hello, and thank you so much for joining me for today's session, What Matters Most? Tips for Organizing Paper. I'm Ashley Hines. I am the founder and owner of The Tailored Life. I am a wife, I am a mom of two, a community advocate, and holistic home organizer. I partner to help people keep only what serves them and to live well organized. I facilitate peace, order, and intentional living through wellness centered home organizing. And simply put, I help people to live with less so they can live more. I spent hundreds of hours with clients, really just organizing their spaces and digging deep into understanding how they want to live. And my passion and expertise I've been able to share beyond my clients through social and through community speaking engagements. I've also been featured on platforms such as the New York Times, Wirecutter, Buy Side from the Wall Street Journal, Real Simple, and most recently, I was featured in the March 2023 issue of Good Housekeeping. I started The Tailored Life in 2020 in the thick of the pandemic. It was truly during this time that I realized how much living organized was self care. And it was pretty much directly connected to and impacted my mental health and my well being. So I started this business really because I wanted to extend that experience to as many people as I could. So, all right, let's talk about paper. I'd argue that most everyone has experienced or is experiencing paper clutter. It accumulates so quickly because it's the category in our homes that we don't have to buy it. It shows up. If you go to your mailbox, if you have bills to pay, if you have children, you will have paper. Just take a moment and think about it. Do you agree? I bet you got some piles you can think about around the house now. So according to some estimates, the world produces 300 million tons of paper every year. And often, once we get into those piles, like once the piles have accumulated, the thought of sorting through that is a daunting nightmare. So I'm hopeful that today I can give you some tips to tackle that paper clutter and hopefully avoid it from ever coming back again. So my first tip is that you want to reduce the amount of paper clutter coming into your home. So just cut it off from the source. I really think this is where most people go wrong because often we don't think about where is it coming from. You've heard the phrase though that clutter is delayed decisions. I'm sure you've heard that. And so being proactive and intentional about what even enters our home gives you less decisions you even have to make and give any sort of mental thought to it. So I highly recommend within this tip recycling junk mail immediately. Like here's my normal thing. I'm going to the mailbox, get it out. I am checking my mail before I even make it back to my door. And I am going past my recycling bin and tossing out all that junk mail before I even get into my home. So those are never delayed decisions for me. You also want to be able to audit where your paper is coming from. So, in particular, unsolicited paper, junk mail, basically, one of the ways and one of the sources for that can often be actually our emails and our online purchases. Typically, once we have connected with an online store, they now have our home address. And so, one of the things I have found to be helpful is to unsubscribe from emails. And it's sort of a note to them, hey, I don't want anything from you. In addition to just hitting the unsubscribe, I often will block them. I will go further to block them because technically unsubscribe is it's just a nice to do if they decide, but blocking, they truly cannot send you emails anymore. So of course we cannot eliminate the junk mail that we get completely. However, we can reduce it. And so the Federal Trade Commission actually has a page devoted to giving you critical ideas and thoughts about how you can reduce this. So I'm going to share this and some of my tips, but this helps to just get rid of some of those credit card offers and insurance offers that I know I'm not alone in getting. You can also call companies direct to be removed from their catalog listing. I know a few years ago, something else I did related to this is put a very discreet sign on our door, to basically say no soliciting. And that helped to manage the like in-person, things you'd get. Even during some of our political election seasons, I have seen folks walking up to our door, they read the sign and they turn away. So that's just one other small note. The last thing I want to say under this tip is that I want to give space and consideration to sentimental items. So, for example, it may be important to establish a boundary with greeting cards. I know those are one of the things when it comes to sentimental paper items that can accumulate pretty quickly. I have worked with clients who basically have decided, okay, if there's not a very intentional written note, I'm not going to keep this one, right? And that's helped to give them some requisites for what cards get to stay in their home, right? And I often have to remind people that the gift is in the giving. Once that person has given you the card and you've read the message, that was their goal. They were not, and I can go on record saying this, I don't think anyone gives a gift expecting that you keep it indefinitely. So, not a card at least. I also, on a personal note, recently realized, related to sentimental, that I was hoarding my kids' schoolwork and artwork. So prior to the pandemic, I was utilizing the memory boxes for our children. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And when the pandemic hit, we became teachers. So we were at home with our children nonstop. And so I was collecting so much paperwork, so many worksheets from his teachers. And I don't know if it was just the pressure of the time, but I kept everything, every single thing that our then 5, now 8-year-old son wrote on, I kept, most of which was organized by the week, but it was still clutter. And so it took me a while. I kept pushing it off because, as I led with earlier, once it accumulates and you're seeing the piles, it's just intimidating. But I took a Sunday afternoon recently. It actually took me 4 hours to go through, because I had gotten emotional and I had to reflect on what this time was and how it shook up our lives. But once I got through it, such a weight was lifted, and I was able to regain clarity of our organizing system and activate it again. And one boundary that I will highlight that has helped me so much with this is our kids' paperwork doesn't even really make it into our home. I am decluttering and going through that at the back door before it can enter into our office or any of our other areas. So just want to put that out there. One other thing under this tip of just really kind of being more of a guardian, if you will, to how paper enters your home, is that it's truly environmentally friendly to go paperless. There's a couple other reasons I'll highlight for going paperless too, but by some estimates, there are approximately 2 billion trees worth of paper that are thrown away every year in the US. And we are using 85,000 tons. Oh, no. 85 million tons of paper a year, which is about 680 pounds a person. The average home is throwing away 13,000 pieces of paper each year. I want to let those stats sink in. We are talking about an enormous amount of paper here, most of which is in packaging, hey, Amazon, and junk mail. But there's a lot at which we can be managing as well. Also, for going paperless, to make this case a little stronger, most companies are digital anyway. I can recall in the last decade that pretty well all of my banking, all of our billing sorts of platforms are now accessible with statements and bills and things that are online. So this provides another level of safety because it's password protected. Often it's encrypted, but it also gives you even easier access. You can access it on your phone, on your mobile apps. And in particular, that kind of pushed us to do pretty much all of our billing auto pay. That has helped tremendously. We're not getting a lot of paper bills. And I manage all of the payments, the financial budgeting and everything through an app called mint.com. There are others like it, but I'm a big proponent for utilizing those resources because, quite frankly, it simplifies our lives by reducing that amount of clutter and physical paper. All right. Still with me? That's tip 1, reduce the amount of paper that is coming into your home. So tip 2, now that we're getting a handle on how much is coming in, let's go ahead and create a simple organizing system to manage that. I think it's really critical that we have an intentional process for how we're going to maintain it. And it needs to be practical. It needs to fit your family's needs. It needs to be realistic, because if it's not, you won't be able to maintain it. So don't overcomplicate this. As I jump into this tip, though, for the foundation, I want to discuss some of the common types of paper. I'll brief through this because this is actually something I can share with you all. I'll mention a freebie at the end of our time today and give you some additional ideas around how to manage our paperwork and advice for retention. The first category I want you to think about is records and archives. So I'm sure you guessed it. These are things that you really should be keeping indefinitely. Some examples are on the screen, and I'll share, our mortgages, our warranties, marriage certificates, birth certificates, death, all of that, our passports, social security, and of course, our estate planning and wills. All that stuff we should plan on keeping indefinitely. So this is one large category around records and archives. When it comes to this next category of household, these are more of the transient or temporary documents. I put tax returns at the top because there are some pretty firm guidelines on how long we should keep our tax returns. If you visit the IRS page, they advise you based on your status. Everyone is different, so I definitely want you to check with the experts. They advise how long you should actually be keeping your tax returns. I'll say personally, I keep them for 7 years. And so each year that I do a new return, I'm shredding the previous. Mind you, I also have them digitally. So they are permanent, but they're permanent in the cloud and in digital space instead of taking up my physical space. Some other things that may be transient documents are other things related to finance, different receipts that you may have to keep for that year. Again, this may be related to taxes, recipes, vehicle documents. The one thing I want to highlight here too is that I often really strongly encourage an action required folder. This just really gets your attention to what is going to take action, what is urgent and or time sensitive. So this is where I recommend keeping bills, things that have a response that are requested, reading that you need to engage in. I pretty much keep my action required folder with me or kind of mobile around the house because there's something I'm giving attention to pretty well every day in that folder. And once I've decided that that's done, now I can roll it into my maintenance plan if it's shedding or I'm shredding it or putting it in my archives. The last category that I speak to, because I know we have some moms on the line and parents in general, parents, guardians, is around children. It's really important to decide what matters most to you. And this was a huge part of what motivated the framework for my talk, is that you have to decide what matters most. We cannot keep everything from our children. I shared my own story, and I want to shout out Robin from my Organized Life box because she really helped me to even frame this more. Although I had the memory boxes for many years, I wasn't activating them as well as I could. And so some of the things that we may want to consider: keeping our class photos, awards, yearbooks, and then really excellent displays of our children's work. So projects and essays and tests that were just stellar. You want to keep the really model work that gives you a sense of where your child was during that time. And what are not worth keeping? Spelling tests, worksheets, math quizzes. Any parent or guardian out there knows you're going to get those out the wazoo. So you have to manage recycling those pretty quickly. I'll breeze through this and just show you some physical examples of how I've managed our own space. So these are some examples of for your records and your archives. I do recommend getting a waterproof, fireproof lockbox. That is what you see first on the screen. For our kind of household, that bin kind of features some of the tabs that I would see as important. And then the one to the far right is actually our daughter's memory box. So that gives you an example of what I would recommend. Again, the action required just kind of goes with you. So I do recommend that you get some bins that work for you aesthetically and functionally, and then hanging folders and labels to make sure that you can maintain that system, have instructions for how you intend to use that space. And what the bins also do is gives you boundaries because you can tell I'm keeping too much if it's starting to pile out of the bin, if you will. The last tip that I'll share for today is to maintain your system. So often when I'm showing stuff on my social platforms or when I talk to people in person about what I do with home organizing, they're like, okay, that project is awesome. Does it stay like that? And my answer is yes, if you maintain it. So even as a professional organizer, my home can get out of hand, but having these systems in place makes it so much easier to reset. And what the reset does is remind me again of what my boundaries are in that physical space. And so I encourage you to decide a regular process for decluttering. It may be daily, weekly, decluttering your paper. It may be daily, weekly, monthly. Like I shared with you, I just integrated it into my lifestyle. I'm walking in from the mailbox. I'm walking in from, my kids getting their backpacks out. I have just kind of, to simplify it for me, I have just integrated it into our lifestyle. But you have to do whatever makes sense for you, and it's not a one and done. There's no easy fit. I've committed to decluttering regularly because I just don't like the pile up, right? So some of the common papers that you'll be decluttering, of course, that I mentioned were like the junk mail, pay slips, tax documents, again, that are older, out-of-date medical records, academic paperwork, manuals. This is a big one. We actually don't need to keep any manuals. They're pretty much all online. Expired coupons. The list can go on and on, but you want to come up with a consistent way of managing it. I often tell people too, if you ever get to a point where you have a big shred pile, I know most of our home shredders don't really do the trick. There are local services such as, I know Goodwill Data Shield is one for me locally, but there are other professional services that can shred and digitize if that's something that you're interested in doing in bulk. So it's something to consider. So, as a reminder, here are the 3 tips that I shared with you today. The first one is to reduce the amount of paper coming into your home. The second tip is to create a simple organizing system. And the third is to maintain your system. So as a reminder with these, again, you want to make sure it's practical for you and give yourself some grace. It takes time to build new habits. We are busy people. So you want to be realistic, but know that you got this. You absolutely can do it. I'm so grateful to be able to promote this meaningful and transformative lifestyle because I just really believe it works. And I'm honored to serve people and thriving in their space. If you join my email list, I mentioned this earlier, I will send you a freebie. It's a freebie packed with the summary for today, some of the common paperwork types, and it also includes a decluttering checklist and just some of the ways that you can get and keep your paper organized. So join my email list. You'll go to thetailoredlife.com. I have the link here on the screen, and you will scroll down and you'll see this visual to join my email list. It's super easy, and I look forward to staying engaged and in contact with you. And thank you. Thank you for being here. You've made it to the end of my session for today. If you want more practical tips and inspiration for holistic home organizing, please come hang out with me on Instagram at The Tailored Life. I hope to see you there. Thank you so much. Hello, and thank you so much.